Hello, welcome all to the Strode Political and Economic Podcast. Today we are going through a panel discussion with UK political parties. Khai is going to be representing the Conservative Party.
Hello.
Ollie is going to be representing the Lib Dem Party.
Hello.
Liv will be representing the Green Party.
Hello.
And Morgan will be representing the Labour Party.
Hi there.
Morgan is calling from a phone as they cannot be here present. But we are going to start with Khai with the voting system.
So at the moment, the Conservative Party doesn't actually want to change the voting system of first past the post. I partially agree with this, as it's important to maintain strong government in the UK with majoritarian points to it. As in the UK, we have had a very, very bad history of parties coming together and forming a government in terms of unions. However, we see this work very fine in Europe, given the CSU-CDU alliance, and in Italy. However, it's proven to work very poorly in the UK. Coalitions have destroyed parties in terms of the Lib Dem Conservative coalition, and I think first past the post is a very good way of maintaining majoritarian governments. However, I believe we should move to an AV voting system to maintain the majoritarian government and keep a majority of MPs in one party in government, but also have a portion of proportional representation in the UK. So I think it's important that we enhance democracy given in the UK. I think AV would be good as it allows reasonably unpopular MPs to not win, as people can choose their first and second and third, etc., and still keep their voice in our democracy alive while maintaining a strong government. And that's my aspect on Conservative voting systems.
Ollie, would you like to give your thoughts on the how the Lib Dem would handle the voting system?
Well, the Lib Dems are supportive of electoral reform. They typically support single transferable vote, which is a rather complicated system, but it usually results in proportionality, more so than first past the post or alternative vote. They have in the past supported alternative vote, such as in 2011 during the AV referendum. Obviously that failed, but they still support it, and it's one of their major policies. I personally support single transferable vote as well, since I think it's offers the best proportionality and is the fairest. And yeah.
So Liv, would you like to give the Green Party's thoughts on the voting system?
Although the Green Party hasn't really published anything in their manifesto about the voting system, they did support the 2011 AV referendum. As like the Lib Dems, they are a minority party. And First Past the Post does promote a two-party system. I think it's good. I'm personally a big fan of the mixed member proportional system that's used in New Zealand. It gives a lot more diversity and allows smaller parties to have their say.
Okay, is that all? Sorry.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you. Morgan, would you like to give your thoughts on the Labour Party's thoughts on the voting system?
Morgan?
Yes.
Would you like, if you, sorry, you might not be able to hear Harry very well. If you give Labour Party and then your thoughts on the voting system that we should use in the UK?
Okay, so Labour overall, kind of, depending on who you ask, support the current first past the post system we have, but over 150 local MPs have submitted motions to back proportional representation. So it's a bit of a mixed bag depending on which part you ask, but as a party overall, first past the post. Overall, I am same as Liv basically. I support a more proportional system, a more democratic system, and one that allows smaller MPs and not two-party dominance in the UK.
Okay, thank you. I think now we're going to move on to the separation of powers, and Khai is going to start us off again with the Conservative Party's thoughts on the separation of powers.
So the Conservatives haven't really outright said too much on separation of powers in the UK, apart from a quote from Boris Johnson, which has indicated his wish to, quote, clip the power of the Supreme Court after they stopped his prorogation of Parliament during the EU, the Brexit situation. I think that we should have a slight increase in our separation of powers. I believe the Supreme Court should have the ability to intervene and enforce the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights. I believe our Supreme Court should have the right to intervene and block legislation going through Parliament that would impact negatively on human rights. However, I am a fan of fusion of powers in the UK Parliament, as we see a great efficiency in terms of legislation and bills. We see it pass through efficiently, with only terrible bills actually receiving condemnation and rebels from their own party. So I think the fusion of powers at the moment works well in terms of preventing extremist legislation. However, our Supreme Court should have the power to stop bills like the police crime and sentencing bill, which was, in my opinion, an evident breach of human rights. I believe our Supreme Court should have that power, but I do not think the executive and the legislators should be divided, as we need to maintain a efficient government in the UK and not wind up like with gridlock such as in the US or sometimes seen in France. And that's my thoughts on the separation of power.
Thank you. Ollie, would you like to lead us on?
Okay, sure. The Liberal Democrats are supportive of a constitutional convention and codifying the constitution. This would allow for greater separation of powers and at least spell it out more. So it would allow for entrenchment, which would allow the Supreme Court to rule acts unconstitutional, which, whilst infringing maybe on parliamentary sovereignty, it would allow for protection of rights and stability in government. They support parliamentary government, so a mixture of executive and legislature, but they generally support greater listing out of the constitution. I'm also supportive of this, and pretty much the same as the Liberal Democrats in this regard.
Thank you. Liv?
Yeah, as before, the Green Party's never really explicitly said anything they would like about separation of powers, but in my opinion, I quite agree with Khai. The Supreme Court should be separated and should have more power. VA, I know, shock, I'm agreeing with Khai. I think they should have been able to block the bill, the police and crime one, and I also agree that the executive and the legislature being fused creates better efficiency when passing legislation, which is efficient in times of crisis.
Thank you.
Morgan, what are your thoughts on the separation of powers, and what are Labour's thoughts?
So Labour haven't really published anything more recently about separation of powers, but under Labour government, the Supreme Court of the UK was introduced in 2009. So that's obviously a huge separation, taking law lords, which is quite hard to say, out of the House of Lords and turning them into judges in the Supreme Court. That obviously creates a huge separation there from a legislative branch into a purely judicial one. In my opinion, I think there needs to be a larger separation. Like Khai and Liv, I would like the Supreme Court to be able to veto, or at least have some significant power to restrict bills going through. Like they said with the Crime Policing Act that's come through recently, and also issues like the proroguing of Parliament in 2020 that Boris Johnson did, which was labelled as unlawful, but they had no actual power to restrict that in any way. It would be nice if there was some sort of enforcement they could put in place in cases like that, but unfortunately they can't do that right now.
Thank you very much. Next we are going to look at upper house reforms. Once again, Khai, would you like to start us off?
At the moment, Conservatives really don't want to change the upper house much, as the House of Lords is greatly stacked Conservative and quite overrepresented in terms of the Lib Dems, and underrepresented in terms of Labour. Personally, I believe the Supreme Court needs a small change, not anything drastic in terms of voted. I still believe we need a unelected upper house, but I believe there should be more neutrality by removing peers and lords from political parties to stop any possible bias or whipping from the Prime Minister or their Chief Whip. I think the Supreme Court, the House of Lords, is quite efficient as it is in not being able to block legislation. The only change I think should be made is obviously neutrality and removing them from parties, but I don't think this would negatively impact the UK at all. Only be a positive, since the House of Lords are still unable to fully block any legislation, only delay and advise and revise. So, yeah, the only real change is removing them from parties, as it would remove any possible hand the Prime Minister has in the upper house, which I think is necessary, as the Lords are there purely to give their professional and best educated opinions on what should be happening to UK legislation and UK bills.
Thank you. Ollie, would you like to go next?
Sure. The Liberal Democrats support an elected House of Lords or upper house. They generally support universal suffrage, so the same as House of Commons, so it'll be elected every 5 years. However, my opinion on it is different. Whilst I support the removal of certain people from the House of Lords, like the Lord Spiritual and the hereditary peers, I do believe that an elected upper house would just mimic the House of Commons, so it would be quite useless. Therefore, I do support an appointed upper house, but I don't think the Prime Minister should have any say over it.
Thank you. Liv, would you like to get it?
Yeah, mine's probably quite similar to Ollie's, like the Green. I think also support an elected upper house, but I do agree that the Lord Spiritual should be removed, as that not just one religion should be represented in an entire government, as well as the hereditary peers. I think they should be removed. Although Blair's reforms did remove the majority of them, they are still there with absolutely not no right to be, but without any cause. I also believe that it shouldn't be elected, because it would obviously mimic the Commons again, but I think it should be appointed maybe by a committee, to actually have people in there who are specialists on their subjects, to actually make sure that all legislation passed is as accurate and efficient as it can be.
Morgan, what's Labour's and your thoughts on upper house reform?
As Liv said, Tony Blair passed Labour. Government did scrap hereditary peers from being able to come into the House of Lords, but they are still there. Keir Starmer supports an elected upper house with elected local and regional MPs to be appointed into the House of Lords. I personally would like to see complete reform of the House of Lords. I would like to see it more like an upper house USA style, where, say, every 5 years, 6 years, there's an election. But I would also like it to be within caveats. So you would have to be a professional and have experience within X industry or X profession, so that it's a more rounded and, like Khai said, with the Tories being overrepresented, also unbiased. So, and then Liv said selected by committee. I also agree with that. Sorry, it's hard going last. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
So, I think that is all. Am I correct?
Unless you guys want to talk about the monarchy, what are your thoughts? Liv, do you want to go first on thoughts? Should we have a removal of the British monarchy?
Obviously I don't believe in absolutist monarchs because they are not truly representative of the people. The constitutional monarchy, it's there, I suppose, and obviously the Queen signs all legislation as it ends, but she can. I personally don't have any strong feelings of it. I'm not like, I love the royals, but I'm also not like, abolish the monarchy. So I don't really think I'm the best person to come to here, so I'm going to go back to Khai.
Personally, my thoughts on the British monarchy, I think they should remain, but I also believe the funding should be quite strictly cut. And along with the Dutch monarchy, have more of a working class, not working class, but realistic royal family. So the royal family would maintain their titles and traditions in terms of signing off legislation as a more of a ceremonial role, and performing, the royal duties really. But I also think employment for the royals would be more fair, instead of hundreds of millions of pounds going to the palace each year. I think the monarch should, be just like anyone else, just, with maintaining the royal traditions and roles, because I do believe it is very, very good for British tourism, the monarchy, and British international prestige, having a head of state as well as renowned as Elizabeth.
My own personal views on it would be, I support the institution of a monarchy, but the current monarchy is, it's not looking too good in terms of, Prince Andrew, other scandals. So although they're not exactly linked in terms of my support for the monarchy, because I am pro, I suppose. My own personal feelings towards members of it do make it quite difficult to support them wholeheartedly, I guess.
Do you think we should abolish it, though?
No, I think that would be counterproductive. There's no real alternative to it that would be successful, really. So I would not, no.
Morgan, what are your thoughts on the abolishment of the UK monarchy?
So I think we should get rid of the monarchy. Ignoring issues like economics and whether, hereditary power is legitimate, on a more fundamental level, I believe fame is abuse, especially hereditary fame is abusive. I believe, in the Human Rights Act we have, everybody has a right to privacy, and that cannot be secured if you have a royal family or a family which is put upon a pedestal to the way which British culture currently does. We've seen with Harry and Meghan and their son Archie that there is significant risk to being in the public limelight in such a way, and especially to be any version of non-traditional, be that mixed race, be that queer, be that, a whole multitude of things. And so I genuinely believe it is, Meghan was suicidal. She said that because of the way the British tabloids have interacted with her, and I don't think that anybody should have to deal with that. And so the thought that somebody can be born and have that presented to them as an option for the rest of their life, that's the main reason that I think the monarchy needs to be abolished. And Buckingham Palace can be a lovely stately home. The National Trust would love to have it, It doesn't need to be lived in full time, and we absolutely do not need somebody's grandma to tell us which bills can and cannot come into law.
That's great. Liv, did you have any closing remarks on the monarchy? I know you wanted to come back.
Just something I thought of, that I think, although, as you said, they're good tourism for the economy, they should be held accountable as regular people, especially with Prince Andrew. He was thinking of using his immunity to avoid the lawsuit, although now he's accepted it and he's acknowledged it. I think that shouldn't be allowed. Like the fact that he could use his immunity to not face the lawsuit about literal sexual assault.
Okay, I think everyone is done. Am I correct? Everyone's
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you ever so much for listening. I think we had a really good panel debate today, or discussion. It's very good, and we will all see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.